You spread all your things out in the band room. It's nice to have a big desk or a big platform or something. Yeah. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. It's good to be home from Mississippi State, isn't it? Yeah. Glad to see everyone this morning. We're certainly grateful for the providence of God in the cool weather again. It's turned from 70 to 50 in a heartbeat, and we're glad to enjoy the cool weather. Cold weather usually kills all the bugs, so that we still have bugs, but anyway, it's good to do that. We are in Ezra 8, but I'd like for us to go through some of our readings briefly. We had gone through 1 Timothy last Wednesday, and so we're on, if you're looking at your reading schedule, number 350, 351, and 352 would take us through yesterday. 353, that would take us through today. That's Hebrews 7 through 10. So my thinking is let's just go through 2 Timothy, Titus, Philemon, and the first 6 chapters of Hebrews. I think, again, without belaboring the point, I think it's really helpful for us to read big sections of Scripture. I did not used to do that when I was growing up. I'll just have to admit that, I would pin in on certain passages and memorize those when I was growing up. And some of our classes didn't emphasize that. There would be an idea, but not the whole reading where you get the whole idea of the book. And I think that's so significant. It's good to have all of it. But we read 1 Timothy, and then in 2 Timothy we have 4 chapters. And 2 Timothy is Paul's what? First book, last book, middle book? It's his last letter. He's at Rome. Without going through, it's not our purpose to go through the details right now, but just suffice it to say that at the end of Acts 28, he is released from 2 years house arrest, and he made some trips that are alluded to in 1 Timothy and Titus. Went to Corinth and Miletus and other places. And he went back to Ephesus, and he left Timothy there, as stated in 1 Timothy 1:3, when he went into Macedonia. And so he had another journey that we just have to put bits and pieces together. Evidently at Troas, this is, I'll just say evidently, likely at Troas, he was recaptured, possibly around 66 or so AD, and taken to Rome. And then he wrote 2 Timothy, and he knew he was going to be killed. And so the reason we think it was Troas is because in the 4th chapter of 2 Timothy, in verse 13, the cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, bring when thou comest, and the books, especially the parchments. Most conservative writers understand that he must have had to leave quickly from Troas. Perhaps he was arrested, did not have a chance to even take some of his clothes or his precious books. And so he's asking Timothy if he could to bring his coat before winter. Isn't that tragic? Here's the great apostle to the Gentiles, and he's concerned about staying warm because of and they're different conditions. In Acts 28, the first imprisonment in Rome, he was in house arrest and people could come to him. And then in 2 Timothy, only live with me. And he's cold. It's evidently a dungeon in Rome, and he's awaiting his execution. So with all that said, 2 Timothy seems to emphasize sound doctrine. Sound meaning healthful. Doctrine, teaching. Healthful, wholesome teaching. And in chapter 1, hold. Look at verse 13. Hold the pattern of sound words. Some have even tried to outline 2 Timothy as the first 2 chapters, hold tenaciously to sound doctrine at the present, and then the warnings are given. And then in 3 and 4, he looks to the future of difficulties. And that's a pretty good outline too. But in chapter 1, you hold to it, and he talks about some who had turned away. In chapter 2, you need to teach it. I think verse 2 is a key. The things which you've heard from me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. And as a teacher especially, verse 15, all of you can quote, one thing as a teacher specific, all Christians for that matter, but teachers in particular, it's incumbent that we do what? Study in order to rightly divide, handle accurately the Word of God. And then he gives Hymenaeus and Philemus and some others, he shows how they had turned away. Chapter 3, the idea is abide in it, because there are going to come times when there will be people who are lovers of money and boastful and so on. And yet, he says, it doesn't have to stay that way with you. You abide, verse 14, in the things which you learned and you are certain of, you've been assured of, knowing of whom you've learned them. Even from a babe, you've known the sacred writings that are able to make you wise unto salvation through faith in Christ. And then the Scripture and the significance of that all of us can quote in 16 and 17. Since that's true, and we need to abide in it, then he needs to do what relative to doctrine in chapter 4? Preach it. Urgency, in season, out of season. And then the concluding remarks that he talks about. I was reading after someone yesterday, and he was saying that 2 Timothy and 1 Peter they have some similarities in that, 2 Timothy is like, they're going to kill me, but I'm going to win. I have won. I've won this thing. And 1 Peter, you're having persecution, but guess what's going to come? The glory that is to be revealed to usward. And so you've got difficulties now, but don't give up. That's 2 Timothy. Titus, here's a key verse in verse 5 of chapter 1. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest do what? Set in order the things that are lacking or wanting, and appoint elders in every city. And so he gives the qualifications of those in Titus 1. And then instructions for older men, older women, younger men, younger women in chapter 2. And the necessity to adorn the doctrine, adorn what you teach in verse 10. And then in chapter 3, again, various individuals have responsibilities that he addresses, and then the closing in 3. All right, then in Philemon, Philemon is about what? Who was Philemon? What's that, Brother Richard? A friend. If you would, hold your hand there real quickly at Philemon. Turn back to Colossians 4. Colossians 4. Philemon had a slave whose name was Onesimus. Onesimus had evidently run away and somehow came across Paul in Rome, was converted, and now Paul is sending him back to Philemon, and he's saying, Philemon, I want you to do what? Accept him. Exactly. Forgive him. Accept him back as your own self. I think here's a neat idea. If you look at Colossians 4, are you with me? If you'll notice in verse 7, all my affairs shall Tychicus make known to you, the beloved brother, faithful minister, fellow servant, whom I have sent unto you for this very cause or purpose, that you may know our state. Verse 9, together with Onesimus, the faithful beloved brother, who is one of you. So Onesimus actually would have been there in Colossae. And so when Paul sends the letter of Colossians to the church he sends the letter to the church at Colossae, and he sends it by Tychicus and Onesimus. Onesimus is the runaway slave who's been converted. And so it seems like then that Philemon actually lived in Colossae, was a member of the church at Colossae. I think all that goes together without taking time. One other quick thing. It's interesting in chapter 3 of Colossians, 22 through the end, he speaks of the servant's responsibility to the master. And only one verse of masters to servants. That's in 4 verse 1. But then if you look at the book of Philemon, written to Philemon at Colossae, the whole book almost is given to the responsibility of, not servants, but the masters. And so you see almost a divine economy, a divine, I guess that's the best way to say it, just an economy of Scripture. That I'm sending this to the same place, Colossians and Philemon, but I'm emphasizing this in this one, this letter, and this and that, so you get both sides in both. All right, and then in Hebrews, we have two major ideas in Hebrews. One is the superiority of the new over the old, of Christ and the gospel over Moses and the law. And it's given for, I think, a second reason, and that is that these Hebrew Christians or Jews who likely lived around Jerusalem due to all of the words concerning the temple and the sacrifice and all that, that these Jews, likely about a generation away, were undergoing persecution. And they seem to be wanting to fall back into Judaism. And so the book is written to show, look, what you have is what everybody else in the Old Testament was looking forward to. Think Hebrews 11, chapter on faith. It's all pointing toward the front, toward the future. Noah being warned of God concerning things not seen as yet. Abraham, when he was called, went out into a place he was to receive, not knowing where he went. All of it is pointing forward. And so the point is that you Hebrew Christians have exactly what has been promised. There's not going to be a second plan. You need to stay with it. And then all throughout are some warnings. So in chapter 1, Christ is pictured as superior to whom? To angels. But angels' words, we've read there one night, 185,000 Syrians were what? Were slain by an angel. As powerful as they are and as steadfast as their words were, in chapter 2 he said we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things that were said, lest haply we what? Drift away from them. If the word spoken by angels prove steadfast. And here's Christ as the Son. So chapter 2 is a superiority of Christ's word over the word of angels. And yet Christ was made a little lower than the angels in that he suffered what? Death. He suffered death. But the purpose of his death was to coincide with the plan of God that he might bring many sons unto glory, to make the author of their salvation perfect through sufferings. Chapter 3 moves on. Christ is superior to whom? First couple of verses. Moses, by so much as a son is superior to the servant. He is faithful over his house as Moses as a son, as Moses as a servant was in his house. So you've got Christ over Moses, a son over a servant, Moses in God's house, Christ over his own house. All those parallels go down. Well, Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, but what happened on the way to the promised land to most of them? They fell. So in chapter 3, he warns them in the last, don't be like those were. But in chapter 4, he shows the fact that let's be careful, let's fear, lest haply a promise being left of entering into that rest, you fall after it. Joshua actually brought them into the promised rest, the promised land. However, that's not really what? What's the point he makes him for? The promised rest is not the final what? For the people of God. Yeah, thank you, Brother Gene. Look at verse 8. If Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken afterward. That is, David would not have spoken afterward of another day. There remains therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And so just as Christ was superior to Moses in 3, the rest that Christ gives in heaven is superior to the rest that Israel enjoyed in the land of Canaan. And then in 4:14 he begins a kind of a new idea. Christ is superior to these people, the angels, prophets in 1 and 2, Moses in 3, Joshua in 4. And then in 4:14 he starts talking about Jesus as our great what? our high priest. And so the superiority of Jesus' priesthood over the Aaronic priesthood in chapter 5, plus the fact that Christ is after the order of Melchizedek. Oh, and I want to tell you so many things about that, but I can't because you are dull of heart, dull of hearing. And so in chapter 6, he says what you need to do is grow up spiritually. Be mature so I can tell you more about Melchizedek. Leaving the doctrine of the first principles of Christ, let's press on to perfection. And he promises that they can do that if God wills, and they continue on. So we'll stop there. That's the end of our readings, and then 7 and following, Lord willing, on Wednesday. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope it's helpful to you to see the bigger pictures of the readings that we're going under, or we're going through, I should say. All right, back to Ezra. Wanted to put just a few things here on just keep up, as we've talked several times, just if you can, even if you're not used to it, get your mind thinking on a line, a timeline. What happened when? What happened when? Because everything from, really falls out from that. That is one major obstacle in dealing with people over even what to do to be saved, because people go back to Psalm 51 and something else in the Old Testament, and they forget, well, that's a different time, different covenant. We're under Christ, and even with Christ, Christ lived under what? What law? The Mosaic law? Yeah. So you have to really go to Acts and the epistles. Principles, yes. But here we are with our first return under Zerubbabel is recorded by Ezra. 536 is when they were allowed to go back. And then we have the temple started, and then it quit. Then in 520, Haggai and Zechariah encouraged them to finish it. And they do in about 516. And then we have the story that we studied from the time that it really begins, that is Ahasuerus' reign, or Xerxes' reign, 484. And then about 478 or 479 is when Esther becomes queen. And so we have her story. And then 474 is the date when deliverance comes to the people. And then we've come back. Then the second return, second stage, is Ezra, 7 through 10, which is where we are. About 58 years, if you do the math, 58 and 58 is 116. So about 58 years from the time the temple was completed, Ezra goes back with this second group. And I went ahead and put this, I doctored this chart a little bit. We'll get into Nehemiah, and he's going to be another 12, 14 years after Ezra returns. He will be there. Ezra will still be alive during the days of Nehemiah. All right, let's move on through here. In our chart here, this is the time period. Artaxerxes is the king of Persia. And here we are in this second return with Ezra coming from Babylon to Jerusalem. And the first 6 chapters, the restoration of the temple under Zerubbabel. And then where we are now is a little later, and it's the reformation of the people and the spiritual restoration. Artaxerxes is now king, Queen Esther's stepson, about 58 years after the temple was completed. We went through that. Now, here's where we were Wednesday night. Ezra comes, let's just glance at it because I want to make a point that I didn't make, or a few points in a note that I've copied down here. In chapter 7 of Ezra, if I can turn back to it, we have them leaving, or at least described as leaving. Ezra himself is described in the first 10 verses. He's a ready scribe, or well-versed, skilled, and he had set his heart to seek the law of the Lord, to do it, and to teach statutes and ordinances. Verse 9 is significant because it tells us about how long the journey took, which was how many months? About 4 months. And then in verses 11 through almost the end, 11 through 26, is Ezra's commission, Artaxerxes' commission. I've got that backwards. Don't copy that. How in the world did I do that? That should be Artaxerxes' commission to Ezra. And he basically says that, Ezra, you can do what? You can go back and what? Take a lot with you, silver, gold, people, animals, plenty of money to take care of your sacrifices, and we're going to give you some to boot to take care of all that. I went back, and I didn't have this Wednesday night, but I just jotted down several things here. You've got the providence. Well, I'll make this known. I'll make this on the next chart. But you've got, if Ezra wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and most think he did, and then he wrote Ezra, the work of Ezra. If he did that, then you've got in the end of 2nd Chronicles. Turn with me. Keep your page. You don't go back, but just 2 or 3 pages in your 2nd Chronicles, the last chapter. Look at 2nd Chronicles 36, 20, the last 2 verses, 22 and 23. Patty, would you read that for us? 22 and 23 of 2nd Chronicles 36. Okay, so, if Ezra is the writer of 2nd Chronicles, we've already come to the point where the temple has been destroyed, they've gone into captivity, and then Jeremiah had predicted that they're going to go into captivity, but what? They're going to come back in 70 years. And it's by the time Jeremiah preaches and prophesies, it's as if some of the people, for a while they think, well, no, this is not going to happen to us. And then they say, well, maybe if we go, it'll be only 2 years. And then when you get to 31 and 33, it's almost like we're destroyed as a people. We're not going to be anything. We'll be decimated, annihilated as a people. And Jeremiah is saying, no, that's not going to happen. You all can quote Jeremiah 31:31. The time shall come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the... So he had predicted there's going to come a time in the future God's going to make a new covenant. Well, if that's true, then the people are going to have to remain. And then in chapter 33, he talks about how we just think we're finished as a people. And he says, no, God's going to bring you back and you're going to be a people. And so they come from the point, we're okay, we're not going into captivity, to the point that, well, if we did, it'd just be a couple of years, to the point Jeremiah says it's going to be 70 years. And then when things start happening and those when they're deposed, right and left here, the people say, oh, no, it's the end. We're not going to. And then Jeremiah says, no, there are things that are going to happen. And so when Ezra comes onto the scene, it's like he's continuing this thought. God said he's going to bring you back. God said that the temple is going to be rebuilt. And so what you see then through all this is the providence of God. And in this book, you see how it's at work. A lot of times we don't see how. But in Ezra, you see anyway. Come back to my little list that I put together. You've got the good life of Ezra. He was a ready scribe. He had set his heart to do these things, so he's on board. And then through Artaxerxes, in verse 13, he allows them to return. In verse 14, it is all according to the law of their God. Then he gave Ezra and the people the silver and gold, verse 15. Whatever free will offerings they could find in verse 16. To buy things for sacrifices, verse 17. Additional silver and gold in 18. Whatever else was needed, basically a royal blank check for Ezra, verse 20. Additional supplies in 21 and 22. to do whatever the Lord wanted in 23. And furthermore, in 24, you're not even going to be taxed. And then in 25 and 26, I want you to appoint a judicial system, and you have the power to punish any who might disobey. The point that it shows here is that while no miracles that we know are occurring except the revelation through the prophets, no miracles are occurring in God's providence, his providential hand over the Persians. Here is Artaxerxes doing what? Actually carrying out what? God's plan. God's plan. He's carrying it out. And all of that, guys, ought to just give us tremendous confidence that, we might not see how it goes, how he does it, but he does it nonetheless. When he says something will happen, it will happen. And that's what I've got in the note here. It's likely Ezra wrote 2nd Chronicles. If you know the passage that Patty read, the last chapter of 2nd Chronicles, you note that in Ezra's record of God's providential hand over Cyrus, which enabled the Jews' return, the rebuilding of the temple. They're continuing as a distinct ethnic race as God had promised, but which the Jews doubted. That's implied in chapter 33, 23 through 26. We're just going to be wiped out as a nation. But God had said in 31, no, I'm going to make a new covenant with you. This emphasis continues in the book, in the book of Ezra as well as Nehemiah. And there's a phrase that I really didn't emphasize Wednesday night. According to the hand of the Lord. That's a little phrase that's used that seems to emphasize God's providence through there. Look at chapter 7 again, verse 6. We'll get into 8 in just a second. Chapter 7, verse 6. Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a what? All right, and the law of Moses, and the king granted him all his requests according to what? Hand of the Lord is God that was upon him. That's the idea. Well, that's just a phrase to describe things, kind of like Joseph in Egypt. God was with him. God was with him. The Lord was with him. And then in verse 10, it doesn't say that the hand of God was on him, but it shows that he is seeking to do God's will. So you have it there. But then look it down in verse 9. For upon the first day of the first month began he to go from Babylon. On the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem. That's a summarize that we'll get to in chapter 8. And all that was according to the what? The good hand of God upon him. So you've got that mentioned again. And then notice down in with Artaxerxes. I put all these passages out because it just seems like, it's like Ezra is recording the favorable disposition of Artaxerxes toward them in several ways. But in these verses, in 14 and then he mentions in 28, he uses this phrase again. Notice in 14. For as much as thou art, this is in the letter that Artaxerxes sends for Ezra, as much as you are sent of the king and his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem, according to the law of thy God which is in thy hand, it's according to your God. We understand that. Though he was probably what do you call it when you're an idolater and you serve, you feel like you're under maybe any god that comes along, a multi-idolater. Then, so all these passages deal with that goodwill. But then in 27 and 28, if you'll notice that, after the letter ends, then Ezra's blessing of the Lord, blessed be Jehovah, the God of our fathers, who hath put such a thing as this in the king's heart, to beautify the house of Jehovah which is in Jerusalem, and hath extended loving kindness unto me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. And I was strengthened, look, there's our phrase, according to what? The hand of Jehovah my God upon me. And I gathered together out of Israel chief men to go with me. So you have this idea of the providence of God that's begun really in the history back in Chronicles. And then it continues in Ezra. Well, this is what God said would happen, and it's happening. And I'm going to tell you how it happened. So that's the beauty, guys. That is one of the real beauties of the Old Testament study, that you see in living color, in vivid language, how God is going about doing various things to accomplish his purpose. When we get to the New Testament, he may say, well, this is going to happen, but he doesn't tell us how. So what we have to do is take the principle learned in the Old Testament, whatever God says that is going to be accomplished will be accomplished. And we could see sometimes how then, but if we don't know in the future, we still what? We're still going to do what? Believe. We're still going to believe that he can accomplish exactly what he wants.
In that verse there about the taxes, it's just the people who work in the house of the Lord, the priests are not going to be taxed.
Yeah.
It seems like, as God's plan at the beginning, the Levites would be taken care of.
Yes.
They wouldn't have to, their job
Right.
was to take care of the temple and teach people. Now it's like we're, he's sending them back. These are the people who's not going to be taxed. Those
Yeah.
that do the work of the Lord there in this house.
Yes, exactly. They're taken care of in a different kind of way. All right. Now, in 7 and 8, we have in trying to divide the last part of the book, in 7 and 8, we have the return under Ezra, this decree, I got it right here, the decree of Artaxerxes to Esther in 7. And then in chapter 8, we have the first 14 verses. There's kind of a rundown of the heads of the families, kind of a census of those who went. And then in 9 and 10, there are going to be sins that they find out that the people committed there in Jerusalem, the mixed marriages, and so Ezra deals with that in the end of 9 and chapter 10. Okay, so here we are in chapter 8, the census of the returning Jews, and the list includes descendants of some 15 heads of houses, very similar to the list in chapter 2, but there are fewer people here. David, if you would, let's not really read all of these names. Let's just spot read a few. Just read 1 and 2, and then we're going to skip a few. 1 and 2 of chapter 8, David.
These are the heads of their father's houses, and this is the genealogy of those who went up with me from Babylon. In the land of Artaxerxes, of the sons of Phinehas, Gershom, the sons of Ithamar, Daniel, of the sons of David, after.
All right. Now, of the sons of Phinehas and Gershom, that would refer to the priest. Of the sons of Ithamar, Daniel, of the sons of David. Sons of David, that would indicate the kingship, the royalty, right. So you've got kind of, it really in chapter 2, he ends with the priest. In chapter 8, he begins with the priest. And so you have those mentioned. Just notice, we're just going to notice not all the names, but how many among these, the sons of Shaniah, into verse 3. 350, all right, into verse 4. 200, into verse 5. 300, into verse 6. 50, into verse 7. 70, into verse 8. 80, into verse 9. 218, into verse 10. 160, into verse 11. 28, into verse 12. 110, and then in verse 13, into verse 13. 60, and then in the end of verse 14. 70. So you come up with under 2,000. It depends on how you count the heads of the fathers themselves. I get 1,496, and that's a number that others came up with. The Waldrons come up with a different number, and I was thinking ahead. I was thinking about you, David. I said, David is just the kind of student to ask, where did the Waldron's number come up that's different? I'm sure you thought about that. And I was thinking to myself, I hope he doesn't ask that question, because I don't know. If you'll notice at the top of page 96 on the Waldron material, the first paragraph, this group who returned with Ezra was not nearly as large as the group who returned to Zerubbabel's day. there were about 50,000 in chapter 2 that went in the first return to Jerusalem. It's like 49,900 and something, right at 50,000. And then the Waldrons say there were 1,354 men plus their families in this group. A total including the families is not given, in contrast to a total number of 50 in those passages we just mentioned. I'm not sure how they get 1,354 unless they take off some of these among the, I just don't know. I won't guess. But I get 1,496 if you count all these. But that's, in one sense, that's immaterial. The thing that is significant is you've got a second going over, and the second going over, second return, is a whole lot less than the first. I think that's the main thing that we can think about. Well, in 15 through 20, what we have is that they come over to the Ahava River. And most don't claim to know where that is. I noticed that there's not much given in the Waldron material about that. I looked that up as best I could, and some think it's a little north of Babylon that might have taken a few days to get there. But Ahava is evidently a place, and the river running through it into the Euphrates was this area. So they go there, and they begin to collect everybody, and there's a problem. They don't have any what? They don't have any Levites. And so Ezra sends people out to basically recruit some, and they're successful. Let's read that, 15 through 20. Kirsten, if you would. Okay, so here at this place, they are there for 3 days, and they found none of the priests. So they sent these men who are mentioned, who were insightful. The last part of verse 16 in the American Standard says who were teachers, and then there's a marginal reading who had understanding. They had understanding evidently in human character, human nature, and who were needed to take care of this. And so they went to this place, and he said, say to Iddo and his brethren, the Nethinim. The word Nethinim, I heard in your translation, is translated temple servants, I think. These were men who were especially given to the Levites to be to help them out in their various works. Well, guess what happened according to verse 18? There's our phrase again. What is it? The good hand of our God was upon us. And so these men, and it's mentioned who the sons of Malai, the son of Levi, the son of Israel, or son of Jacob. That indicates they had a right to be what? Priest. They come, and verse 20, the Nethinim whom David and the princes had given for service, 220, all of them were mentioned by name. So we have this difficulty when they get ready by the river Ahava, and these men are no Levites. Well, we need them to take care of this bounty that we're taking, the vessels and the silver and gold, and we're going to see that in just a minute. Well, in 21 through 23, there's they're worried about what's going to happen to them, and think now. You think, well, what could happen? They are taking a tremendous treasure of silver, gold, money. If you think about just the tonnage of the silver and gold. I told my wife, I get tired of hearing on the radio and TV people misuse the word ton. He's got a ton of this, a ton of that. Do y'all hear that a lot? It's almost become, he's got a ton of friends. He got a ton of this. I said, that's a poor word for it. Anyway, what I was going to say is these are tons. These are literal tons of silver and gold. And so it looks like Ezra's been telling Artaxerxes, our God can protect us. And, if we had I can't tell him that we don't need an armed escort, because I don't always trust armed escorts. And so in 21 through 23, they end up fasting and entreating God. Entreating God's another term for what? Pray. Okay, let's read that. 21 through 23. Kylie, if you would. Okay, so thank you. So he's giving this as history. He answered our prayers. Well, we're going to see that in just a little bit. So they're worried about, I can't ask him to give us a band of soldiers, horsemen, but we're carrying a lot of goods, a lot of silver and gold. And so let's pray and fast. And then they did, and everything turned out okay. Well, we've got what is actually being taken back in 24 through 30. Sister Sandra, if you would, 24 through 30, and we'll notice just the tremendous amount of weight of gold and silver and all of the vessels that are sent. Okay, 24 through 30. Okay, all right. Sister Bobby, you feel like reading? Okay, let's stop right there. A talent is somewhere between 66 and 75 pounds. If you took maybe just an average of 70 pounds times 650, you've got the better part of 35 tons. 35 tons of silver. And then you notice how many talents of gold? End of verse 26. 100 talents. 100 times 70 is 7,000. A ton is 2,000 pounds. 7,000 divided by 2,000 is 3.5 tons of gold. What's your truck weigh, Brother Gene? About a ton and a half? What does your F-150 weigh? Right at 2 tons, you think? Yeah, I know they're less than they used to. Well, Brother Charlie, on your truck is heavy. Chevrolet is pretty heavy. 2 tons maybe? Yes. Around 2 tons. You think Brother Charlie's big truck he's got, the diesel, and that's about 2 tons, and then you put another ton and a half. That's how much gold they had. So you got a tremendous amount. If you did the math, what is an ounce of gold? To me, these are fascinating things to do sometimes. What does an ounce of gold weigh now? That $2,000? I'm sorry. What does an ounce of gold weigh? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? No, an ounce of gold is worth about what? Isn't it about $2,000 now? Close to $2,000. 16 times 2,000, that's $32,000 to make 1 pound. times 70 pounds, astronomical, that's just 1 talent, times 100. And then you got a tremendous amount of,
Can you imagine what it took to transport?
I was thinking that very thing. You got about maybe 2,000 people, wagons and all kinds of, mules and whatnot to carry all this. Okay, Sister Bobby, we interrupted you. You got down to verse 27, right, 28 and through 30. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, he says in verse 28, you are holy unto the Lord. The vessels are holy. So we are giving them into your custody, basically is what he's saying. So you need to do what? Verse 29. Be careful. Watch. Keep them until you weigh them. In other words, we are trusting you to have them until we get to Jerusalem, and then everything is recorded. The weighing of them, the weight of them, all that is recorded and put in the chambers of the house of the Lord. So they did that. In verse 30, they received the weight, the vessels to bring them to Jerusalem to the house of God. All right, we're going to have to stop, and we're almost through, but it's past. Let's, Lord willing, pick up verse 31 through the end and going into 9 on Wednesday night. But they end up coming to Jerusalem and offering some burnt offerings, and we'll see that. Then 9 and 10, we have kind of a change of setting with the spiritual reforms that Ezra puts in place. Comment or question, anybody? Linda, anything?